Okay, so today live we'll be delving into the world of Diptera with tiny midges devastating diseases. And I'm really delighted to welcome Dr. Marion England from the Pirbright Institute to talk to us about this fascinating subject. So over to you, Marion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Okay, so this is the outline of my talk. So I'm going to explain what culicoides are, what culicoides biting midges are, and the main virus that is of concern that they're able to transmit, which is blue tongue virus. I'll talk you through the history of blue tongue virus within Europe, and then we'll talk about what's happening now, what can be done about it, and if there's time, we'll have a quick look at some other viruses of concern that they also transmit. So I just wanted to run through the major kind of arthropod groups that spread viruses to humans and livestock. So culicoides biting midges are much tinier than the other ones that you're more likely to have already heard of. So mosquitoes, which transmit West Nile fever, Rift Valley, dengue. These have a immature stage that breeds in aquatic habitats, so they require still water like containers, ditches, and ponds. And then we have ticks. So there's two different types of tick. There's hard ticks and soft ticks. So the picture on the left is of a soft tick, and they can transmit African swine fever. We don't have those in the UK or in Northern Europe, but we do have hard ticks, which is what the picture on the right is. And I just wanted to pop this picture up because one of the ticks has not had a meal and the other one has. And you can see the huge amount of blood that they can take up into their bodies and really expand themselves to a huge amount. I mean, it's like me sort of becoming the size of the room that I'm in. So it's quite an achievement. And then we have large biting flies, so things like Tabanids and Stomoxys. And they tend to be livestock associated. They breed in moist, organically enriched habitats. And they can be transmitters of things like lumpy skin disease and equine infectious anemia. And then the ones we're going to talk about today are tiny little biting midges called culicoides. So this is a genus of biting midge. So they are not aquatic in the same way that mosquitoes are. Their larvae live in organically enriched habitats. So it needs to be damp, but they can live in mud, compost heaps, animal dung, but not actually sort of in water as such. And they spread a range of diseases, some of which hopefully we'll have time to talk about today. So this is the culicoides midge. So it has a little wing pattern. It's very tiny, and I absolutely guarantee you will have been bitten by one at some point, probably many times. So there's about 1,300 species in the world, and in the UK we have about 50 different species. So they're 2 to 4 millimeters long, and the pictures in the middle just show the relative size of the midge compared to a housefly and a mosquito. They're hugely locally abundant. So there's billions upon billions of the things on a single farm. And they're found pretty much everywhere in the world, apart from Antarctica, New Zealand, and Hawaii, allegedly. The way that they are vectors of disease is the females take a blood meal. So the males don't blood feed, they feed on nectar, but the females need blood in order to mature their eggs. So they need that protein source in order to create their eggs. And so it's when they bite and take this blood meal that they are able to transmit diseases. So the distribution, activity, and the dispersal of these midges is directly influenced to virus outbreaks. So the viruses, and I've just put them in brief here, that they transmit is, the main one is blue tongue virus. So if I say BTV, I'm referring to blue tongue virus, African horse sickness virus, epizootic hemorrhagic disease virus, and there's one human virus that we know that they transmit, which is called Oropouche, which has been in the news quite a bit recently, as there's been quite an explosion of cases in Central America. And it's also, we've had imported cases into Europe for the first time. Because they're so tiny, they're strongly influenced by the weather and the climate. And so their distribution and abundance is very much linked to that. So this is the life cycle of the midge. So the female and male will mate, and then the female takes the blood meal. And then there's a process where she digests the protein blood meal and develops eggs in her abdomen. And then she oviposits those in some nice organic substrate somewhere. And then the eggs hatch within that substrate and go through 4 different larval instar stages before pupating and then emerging as an adult. And on farms, we create this wonderful habitat for Culicoides. So we have cows or livestock organically enriching the soil. We have things like dung heaps. We have a large livestock population contained within an area. So it really provides everything that the Culicoides need. So blue tongue virus causes blue tongue disease in ruminants primarily. So this is cattle, sheep, goats, and camelids, so things like llamas and alpacas. It's non-contagious by and large, so it's only transmitted by the bite of an infected midge. Severe disease is usually only seen in sheep and some species of deer. So in the US, they have a lot of disease in white-tailed deer. And in Europe, we tend to see most severe disease in our various sheep breeds. And there's 29 different serotypes so far and counting. And there's many different strains per serotype. And these serotypes can behave in very different ways. So they can present clinically differently. And they're almost like 29 different diseases. And if you have one, you don't then have protection, immune protection against a different serotype. So they don't sort of, you can't catch one and then be immune to another serotype if it happens to come along. So this was historically an exotic disease to Europe. It was found across Africa and the Middle East. But since 1998, there's been dramatic changes in the distribution and epidemiology of this disease. So there's been an increase in global incidence and an increase in the diversity of viruses. So all those different serotypes are becoming more prevalent in new areas. So this is what it does. This is clinical signs. The severity and the way that this disease presents is related to an interaction between the host and the virus. So how the virus affects different sheep breeds, different species, but also down to the individual immunological status of the individual. So typically, though, we would see fever, swelling of the face, hemorrhaging, nasal discharge, lameness, and depression. And in severe cases, we do see cyanosis of the tongue, but it's very much only in severe cases. So blue tongue generally does not present with a blue tongue, so it's a little bit of a misnomer. But it does have symptoms that are very similar to a lot of different diseases, so it can be quite difficult to spot. And it does rely on diagnosis in a lab. So the way that blue tongue is transmitted between animals with the vector is you have an uninfected adult vector. So you have a female Culicoides who doesn't contain the virus, comes along and bites an infected sheep, and then in the blood meal that she takes, the virus is also taken up. And then it takes about 4 to 20 days for the virus to leave the gut of the midge and to replicate and disseminate to the salivary glands of the midge. So now you have multiple copies of the virus within this midge, and virus is present in the salivary glands. And then when the adult female has digested her blood meal, laid her eggs, and she's ready to take another blood meal, she then bites an uninfected animal and spits the virus into the uninfected animal as she's feeding. And then the virus enters the susceptible sheep, and then it replicates within the sheep. And that takes about 2 to 4 days before another midge will come along, take a meal from that now infected sheep, and be able to take up the virus. And we just keep going round and round. So as Kieran mentioned, I work at the Pirbright Institute. So the Pirbright Institute is an animal virus research institute. This is our main high containment building, so we can deal with highly contagious pathogens within this building. And one of those that we specialize on is blue tongue. So as part of our work, we run the Culicoides surveillance for the UK. So we have 19 light traps out in the field at the moment. We use these downdraft black light traps, which is the picture on the left. So essentially they have a UV light, which acts as a lure for the Culicoides. And then there's a computer fan inside the trap that once the midges fly towards the light, it then sucks them down and they're collected in the beaker at the bottom. So these run by mains, so we can just leave them plugged in all year round. And they're run by volunteer farmers or zookeepers across the UK for us. So we've been doing this surveillance since 2006. And from all the data that we've gathered across that time, we know that there's 2 peaks in adult activity for Culicoides throughout the year. So they tend to emerge in the spring around April time. And then their numbers rapidly increase through May and June, and then they dip off a little bit in July and August when it's a bit dry and they tend to be prone to desiccation. And then September, they tend to have a second peak. So the main periods for kind of biting are that spring and early autumn or late summertime. So this is the history lesson on blue tongue. So as I said, it used to be considered an exotic virus. And so it used to just be found between the 2 red lines on this map. So before 1998, there were very occasional incursions into Spain or, into a few countries of the Mediterranean, but they were short-lived and didn't sort of amount to much. So the main vector for blue tongue virus is Culicoides amikala. So this is a sort of Afro-tropical species of Culicoides. So blue tongue was limited to the range of this vector species, which is the North Africa and slightly into the Mediterranean. So in 1993, my predecessors conducted a risk assessment looking at whether blue tongue could pose a risk to Northern Europe. So there's a large naive population of susceptible ruminants. They found that temperatures were sufficient for virus replication and to maintain outbreaks, but we didn't have Culicoides amikala, so we didn't have the vector. And what was unknown was whether any of our own northern species were competent vectors for this virus. And if they were, then the risk would look something like this in the map. So there has been some range expansion of Culicoides amikala. So it has moved slightly further north, but by and large, it's stayed very much limited to the Mediterranean. So it's still not anywhere near us at the moment. What we have seen between 1998 and 2006 is multiple serotypes, multiple incursions coming in more and more often from Africa and the Middle East. So each of these different coloured arrows is a different serotype of blue tongue. And then something unprecedented happened in 2006. So in 2006, blue tongue popped up in the Netherlands. So this is the first time that there'd been any blue tongue disease in Northern Europe, and it randomly popped up in the Netherlands. So this was very, very concerning. And it spread very rapidly. So what this told us was that we do, in fact, have competent vectors. So our Culicoides species, or some of them, are able to transmit this virus. And actually, we didn't need Culicoides amikala to expand its range in order for blue tongue to have an impact in Northern Europe. So in 2006, there was some limited spread to Belgium, Germany, and France. And then in 2007, it spread much further, much more widely, and also into the UK. And then in 2009, it shrunk a little bit, and we didn't have it again in the UK because there was an effective vaccine, which was over the winter of 2007 to 2008, there was a large vaccination campaign in the UK, and it meant that we didn't have the virus re-emerge in 2009, and we were the first country to actually get rid of it. So how did it come across to the UK? So this cow on the left is Debbie the Highland cow, and she was the unfortunate first case of blue tongue in the UK when it came across in 2007. Midges can be carried very long distances by the wind. So what actually happened was we looked at the direction of the wind, and we're able to use a model that the Met Office have to model particles on the wind and look at which way they might be blowing, if the wind is blowing in the right direction. And yeah, so we could basically model the particles blowing across the sea. And we were able to identify that midges were blown across from a source in Belgium on the 5th of August, because this is when the wind was blowing in the right direction. So if we sort of fast forward a little bit, this is now the picture we have of blue tongue virus in Europe in 2009. So each color is a different serotype. So we have a very different picture from the one I showed you pre-1998. Now we have multiple serotypes coming into Northern Europe and actually establishing themselves as well. However, we did get rid of, so it was blue tongue serotype 8 that came into Northern Europe in 2006. And the whole of Northern Europe was able to completely eradicate it by large vaccination campaigns. So why did it arrive? Normally with a disease, you would expect gradual spread northwards. So we would expect it to come into the south of France, move up through France, into Northern Europe, but we didn't. It just randomly popped up in the Netherlands as if from nowhere. So this, as I said, this wasn't the result of a range expansion of Culicoides amicola. Blue tongue serotype 8 was not anywhere near the periphery of the European Union, so it wasn't even close. So it probably wasn't blown in by wind-borne infected insects, because again, we would have seen it in Southern Europe beforehand. It was probably not an animal import, because we've traced all the animals that came in from the Netherlands at that time and nothing looks suspicious. 2006 was a particularly hot year, and virus replication speeds up and is more efficient when the temperatures are warmer. So that's what probably helped kickstart this outbreak when it did come in. But really, we still don't know where it came from, and it remains a mystery. In 2015, BTV8 re-emerged in France and has been circulating there at low levels ever since, but doesn't seem to be doing very much damage like it did the first time. So this is just very briefly the sort of approximate costs that are associated with a virus outbreak like this. So, you know, in 2007, we're looking at 170 million euros, and 85% of these costs are borne by the cattle industry. And this is just looking at Netherlands alone. So if you extrapolate across Europe, it has a massive economic impact on the farming industry. So again, this is now a 2019 map. So jumping on another 10 years, again, each different color is a different serotype, and you can see there's so much more going on around the Mediterranean, particularly sort of Italy and Greece and Turkey and the Iberian Peninsula. And we have had a few serotypes popping up into sort of south of France and those kind of areas. So it's a very different picture. It's a much more colourful picture than we had pre-1998. Culicoides adults disappear during the winter. So they can't survive in very cold temperatures. So the way that Culicoides overwinter is in their larval form in the soil. And then in the spring, when the temperatures warm up, they then pupate and emerge as adults. So the adults are only present during the spring, summer, and autumn. So how is blue tongue able to persist year on year in Northern Europe? There's several mechanisms which have been postulated. One of them is transoviral transmission. So this is where the adult Culicoides passes the virus through to her offspring. But there's been no evidence of this, and experimental studies have shown that have not been able to demonstrate this as a mechanism. So it's possible that it happens and we just haven't been able to witness it yet, but we don't think that that's a very reliable transmission route, but it's possible. The other thing is that some adults do make it through the winter. So some infected adults perhaps hunker down in microclimates in barns and do actually have are able to survive through a particularly mild winter through to the spring and then kickstart an infection again in the livestock. We may get long viremia, so persistence of infection within a host if it's infected quite late or maybe early winter, maybe early December. It may be able, the infection may be able to persist in the host all the way through till the spring when the Culicoides re-emerge and start biting again. And then we do know that transplacental transmission happens. So, a sheep or a cow can pass the virus across the placenta through to its offspring. So then if the offspring is born in the spring, then we can have infected animals ready to be bitten by our Culicoides when they emerge. So it may be any or all of these mechanisms that get the virus through the winter in our temperate regions. So in 2023, it was almost pretty much exactly the same thing happened again. So blue tongue emerged on a Dutch farm in September in 2023. This time it was blue tongue serotype 3. So this was different from the blue tongue serotype 8 that we had before, but it is very much the same situation. Blue tongue serotype 3 was not anywhere near Europe. It wasn't sort of on our radar as something to be looking out for, but it just randomly popped up again. And it spread incredibly rapidly across the Netherlands. So it first emerged in September. By early November, the Netherlands had lost nearly 5% of its sheep population. So 30,000 sheep were dead. Up to 50% mortality rates were reported. So this was much more severe than BTV8 actually. And unusually, we saw quite a lot of clinical disease in cattle as well. So normally we don't see clinical disease in cattle, and we didn't particularly with BTV8, but BTV3 does seem to be much more aggressive. So this map on the left shows the extent of spread just in a couple of months in the Netherlands in 2023. And then in November 2023, we detected BTV3 in our populations in the UK for the first time. So at the end of every, sorry, I'm just checking the time, I'm all right. At the end of the year, the government conduct a serosurvey of the south and east coast of the UK. So what we're looking for is, have we missed any disease incursion? So they take about 6 farms from each of the counties along the south and east coast, and they test them for blue tongue antibodies. So every year we do this and we never find anything. And then in 2023, we found that there was a blue tongue positive animal in Kent. So this was one cow from a herd of 75, and only 15 of them were sampled, and we happened to find the one positive cow. So the probability of finding it was incredibly small, but we happened to hit on it. So it spread. So we had then 2 clusters of infection at the end of 2023 within the UK. So we had a number of cases in Kent, and there seemed to be a second incursion event from the continent that was separate from the Kent foci in Norfolk. So we had a few cases in Norfolk as well. So by the end of 2023, there were 126 cases identified in the UK, but strangely, given what was happening in the Netherlands, we weren't seeing any clinical disease. There's a number of reasons for this. One is that these areas are very low livestock density areas, and the livestock that are there are mostly cattle, which we're less likely to see clinical disease in. So the map on the right is sort of a as things stood as we were heading into the winter of 2023-2024. So we had disease across all of the Netherlands. We had some spread into Germany, a little bit into Belgium, and these two little clusters in the UK. And then the midges went away for the winter. We had quite a short vector-free period because it was quite a mild winter. So normally we would expect the midges to disappear in about November and not come back till April, but they didn't actually disappear till January 2024, the 8th of January, and they re-emerged in March. So there was actually quite a short time when the midges weren't active, and that doesn't really help when you're trying to stop a virus overwintering. So thinking about what we can do about this, can we remove Culicoides breeding habitats? Nice idea, but it doesn't work. We've tried it and it doesn't have any impact on Culicoides populations on the farm. Things like repellents and insecticides, pouring those on animals, they're very short-lived. They also don't stop transmission because they don't work quickly enough. So the insecticides don't kill the midge before it's bitten. So the midge will land on the animal. Even if it becomes contaminated with the insecticide, it will have fed and left and then drop dead. So it doesn't actually stop transmission to the animal because it doesn't work fast enough. Typically, repellents only last a few hours, and that's if it's not raining. So having to reapply every few hours, if you have a herd of 2,000 cattle, is just not an option. There is some evidence that stabling animals can protect them from Culicoides bites, because particularly during the summer, we have some evidence that they're more likely to be outside biting compared to inside, but possibly bringing your animals in the winter may then draw the midges inside. As it gets colder, the midges are more likely to move inside to try and stay alive. So stabling can have an effect, but it depends on the time of year. So the main way of getting rid of blue tongue is through vaccination, and that's how we were able to do it in 2008. So in April, Germany rolled out an autogenous vaccine. An autogenous vaccine is where you take virus out of an infected animal, inactivate it, and then inoculate other animals to induce an immune response. This is not a very sophisticated vaccine platform, and it should only be used really in a very, very localized setting. But this was rolled out across quite a wide area in Germany, and unfortunately, the virus was not inactivated properly. So in April 2024, we then had resurgence of blue tongue as a result of this vaccinating. I use air quotes because essentially they were putting live virus into animals, which wasn't great. So April, everything kickstarted again in Germany, and then yes, I'll tell you about what happened next in a minute. But over the winter, 3 vaccine companies did produce a proper vaccine for BTV3. These vaccines don't provide sterile immunity, so they don't stop an animal becoming infected, but the aim is to reduce the severity of symptoms and reduce the mortality rate. So all vaccines must go through several stages for approval and licensing, but they can be approved for use under emergency license. And I think we had this with COVID, is that there wasn't time to fully test all the vaccines in order to get them out quickly enough. So this is the same situation. The evidence provided by the vaccine companies was strong enough that they were then issued under emergency license. So this all sounded great. So in May 2024, the Netherlands vaccinated 90% of its sheep flock with these 3 approved vaccines, and also a proportion of its cattle. And the vaccine was also approved for use under emergency license in other European countries, including the UK, at the end of August 2024. So this all sounded great. We thought we were out of the woods. However, since June 2024, this is what has happened across Europe. So despite vaccinating 90% of the sheep population, they have still had, I think I updated this a week or 2 back, 10,621 cases. So the map on the left is the Netherlands, and you can see there's huge amounts of disease everywhere. Germany as well as kickstarting themselves with the autogenous vaccine, have had significant spread from the Netherlands across pretty much most areas in Germany. They're now up to over 15,000 cases. It's also spread north to Denmark, so they've had just over 1,000 cases, and it's also spreading from Belgium down through France as well, and Belgium is more or less covered. And there's also been spread to the Czech Republic, Norway, Switzerland, Portugal, Austria, Sweden. It's just spreading a lot this year. And as I mentioned, BTV3 is causing more severe disease than BTV8 did, so we're getting much more significant losses in livestock. So within the UK, we've had it re-emerge here as well. So we think that infected midges blew over again on the wind from the continent. And I think that happened in August. So since June, we've had 185 cases. It seems a much lower number than what they're seeing on the continent. And that's mainly because once we declared a restriction zone, which is the red area on the map, that limits animal movements. After a farm has been found to be infected, we don't have the resourcing, or the decision has been made that it doesn't benefit to then go and test every single animal on the farm. So once a farm turns positive, that's it. There's no more testing. So essentially, you're looking at 185 different premises, but there's probably multiple animals on those premises. There's also likely to be underreporting because of the implications on trade and moving your animals around, that people don't want to have blue tongue declared on their farm. We are seeing mild to severe clinical presentation. We have seen deaths, and the vaccines have been deployed. So some people have started vaccinating their animals. One of the problems with the restriction zone, so animals can't move in or out, but they also, there was a period of time where animals couldn't be moved to slaughter either. So this obviously has economic consequences, but also it has welfare impacts as well. So animals are remaining on farms months longer than they would have done. They're past the point where they're suitable for slaughter and for meat. Farmers are having to find feed for these animals that they hadn't resourced. So there's food problems, there's animals remaining on farms now we've got lambing starting, you're getting overcrowding. So these are all issues that are having to kind of be dealt with as knock-on effects of the disease being present. So at the moment, we're doing active surveillance along the west border. So we randomly test along the western border of the restriction zone in case it's spilling over into areas further west. Things have slowed down now because we are at the end of December, but it has been quite mild, as I'm sure you've been aware. Midges are active down to about 4 degrees. So unless we get some hard frosts, we really haven't killed off the adult population yet, which means that there are still infected midges still flying around and biting animals. So just to sort of say how the Pirbright Institute is involved with this. So we have the non-vesicular reference laboratory, which conducts all of the testing for the UK. So all of the samples that are collected from the UK come to Pirbright for testing. And then, as I said, we also have the Culicoides Reference Laboratory, which runs the traps and monitors the activity of Culicoides across the UK. We provide scientific expertise and recommendations to government. We review policies and licensing documentation. We look at the weekly risk of airborne incursion from the continent of infected midges. We also have a BTV transmission model, so we can look at the impact of if we were to get midges or livestock movements into certain areas. We can then model the transmission and see how big that outbreak might be, and then also test out different mitigation strategies. And we provide advice on control measures, so things like whether or not to use insecticides and things like that. Okay, so that's blue tongue. So I will very quickly just tell you about another virus that's transmitted by Culicoides. So this is epizootic hemorrhagic disease virus. So this is a closely related virus to blue tongue. It affects deer, occasionally sheep, goats, and cattle. So we've never had it in Europe before until 2023. It's been a widespread problem in North America. They farm white-tailed deer, which I mentioned earlier, also get affected by blue tongue, but they're also highly affected by EHDV. So this, for us, has always been a problem that was across the pond. It was first detected in Tunisia in 2015, and then again in 2021. And then in 2022, it sort of seemed to spread into the Mediterranean region, so Sicily and Sardinia, and up into Spain at the end of 2022. And then it spread very rapidly into Portugal and France in 2023, and it's been continuing its march northward throughout 2024. So the map at the bottom, all the little orange splats are EHDV. So it's now up into Brittany. So this is another virus which we're very much keeping an eye on. We're not entirely sure what it would do to our animals, so whether it would affect our wild deer populations, whether it would affect our cattle, because it does seem to be clinically presenting in cattle within France. So this is something that is going to be a high risk for us going into 2025, as well as the re-emergence of blue tongue virus. So I was going to tell you about African horse sickness, but I want to leave some time for questions. But very briefly, as you can see, this is a very nasty virus. It's probably the most lethal horse virus there is. It kills up to 90% of horses. It's not anywhere near Europe at the moment, but it did randomly pop up in, if I scoot forward, Thailand in 2020, when the rest of the world was dealing with the COVID outbreak. We were having to remotely deal with an African horse sickness outbreak in Thailand in 2020. It was nowhere near Thailand previously. So just this shows the ability of these viruses to suddenly make huge geographical jumps. So it's not something that, sorry, let me just zip through. It's not something that we're directly worried about, but when we see these things making large geographical jumps, and we see BTV3 and BTV8 coming as if from nowhere into Europe, this is something that we absolutely need to be mindful of. Right, so in summary, BTV incidence has increased globally and across Europe since 1998 and continues to do so. We've had two unprecedented outbreaks, so BTV8 in 2006 and BTV3, which we're currently experiencing at the moment. Emergency vaccinations are available, but we're unsure how well they're working at the moment, given what happened in the Netherlands after they vaccinated. And there are other concerning strains around and other Culicoides-borne viruses like EHDV close to us. So we'll very likely see resurgence of blue tongue virus in 2025 and possibly also epizootic hemorrhagic disease virus also entering the UK. So with that, I'd like to thank all of my team and various collaborators at the Animal and Plant Health Agency, the Met Office, and all our volunteers who run our traps for us.